One thing you've been very open about is your relationship with Nick.
Mhm,
You mentioned the abuse. You mentioned just kind of, some of his dark
mhm,
desires.
mhm,
Something that really bothered me when I was watching the act is he comes across a little sympathetic towards the end. They
mhm.
highlight his autism.
Mhm.
Do you have any thoughts about that? And despite what Nick did to you and your mother, do you have any empathy for him being in prison and what he has gone through?
I think that we both, like him and I, both have a lot of regrets. Obviously, I wish that this would have never happened this way. Now, for him specifically, I did my time. I know he's doing his time for his part of things.
Hmm.
I hope that whatever he does with his future, because he is spending the rest of his life in prison, um, I acknowledge that I am the reason for that. However, I don't feel either that it's a situation where it's a sympathetic type of situation.
To get that. I would have been happy if me and her would have gotten the same exact amount of time. I'm not one of those people where I'm gonna be trying to wish her a life sentence or any crap like that, like she did to me. I'm not a conniving person like that. It's just not in my blood.
Nicholas Godejohn sits inside a small prison cell where he will stay for the rest of his life. It only took a jury 2 short hours of deliberations to find Nick guilty of the first-degree premeditated murder of Dee Dee Blanchard. Nicholas has no possibility of parole. Meanwhile, his co-defendant, Gypsy Rose Blanchard, was granted a sweet plea deal. She is now free and has starred in a Lifetime TV series and is raking in a lot of cash on social media. Is this real justice? That's the question we will answer as we reveal the truly alarming information we learned about Godejohn's trial and how Gypsy Rose expertly made him her scapegoat. Welcome back to Becca Scoops. My partner is a veteran detective, and I'm Becca, a former RN. And this is part 4 on our series on Gypsy Rose Blanchard that will be focusing solely on Nicholas Godejohn. According to our research, Nicholas Godejohn never stood a chance at a fair trial. However, to understand the complexity of how Nick became another victim in this case, we need to fully comprehend who he is, and only then can we fathom the truth about what really happened with Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Nick made a traumatic entrance into this world. At birth, he required emergency intervention as the umbilical cord was wrapped around his tiny neck. Doctors surmised he was deprived of oxygen. Early on in his childhood, he failed to progress like other children his age. He was placed in special ed and diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism. Nick's reading and writing skills were found to be at 4th grade level when he graduated from high school. At 19 years old, after a failed attempt at employment at a pizza parlor, Godejohn was placed on long-term disability, or SSI. Nick had met the criteria by the government and was certified as being a fully disabled person. According to the records, Nick had a severe disruption of his ability to function in society, hold employment, have friends, maintain relationships, prepare his own food, and take care of his hygiene. Dr. Theodore Wasserman, a pediatric neuropsychologist who is considered one of the foremost experts on autism, evaluated Nicholas at length. Wasserman stressed that people at the high end of the spectrum, such as those with Asperger's, want intimacy but have a very difficult time maintaining it. In fact, the difference between autism and Asperger's is those with Asperger's want to be social and get along with people, but they just don't know how. The disorder interrupts their ability to read social cues, and they misjudge situations. Those with Asperger's have the same kind of social isolation as a person with classic autism, but the isolation is due to their inadequacy as opposed to actually choosing it. So, their need for an emotional connection is paramount. However, their isolation is due to their inability to connect as we do. And for some, with limited resources and help, this disorder can create a very sad and lonely life. Dr. Wasserman also revealed that at the time Nick was approached by Gypsy online, he had come out of a failed romantic relationship, but could not look introspectively to say what went wrong. So he could not draw conclusions about how to keep a relationship from failing. Dr. Wasserman said, quote, "Like most people with Asperger's or autism, Mr. Godejohn was desperate to have a relationship and went right back to find a new person without having learned from his prior experiences." In 2012, Nick was on the heels of the failed relationship, and this made him extremely vulnerable, more so than at any other time in his life. He would do anything in his power to ensure that an emotional connection was successful. Nick mentioned he was very lonely at this time. This was the perfect storm for someone with ill intentions to manipulate Nick, who was highly susceptible to such machinations. As Nick had expressed his loneliness to his mother over the breakup, Gypsy was trolling the Christian Dating for Free website. When she saw Nick's profile, she immediately contacted him. And, as is typical with those with Asperger's, Nick did not initiate this encounter. However, he did respond to Gypsy's instructions when she suggested they take the relationship to Facebook. Remember, this initial contact is in 2012, and Dee Dee's murder isn't until June 2015. According to Dr. Wasserman, Gypsy tapped into Nick's vulnerabilities, almost like a predator seeking its prey. As we grow up, most of us learn to interact socially from our experiences with the outside world. From our peers and family, we learn social cues. However, Wasserman claimed autistic people receive their information about the social requirements of relationships from the structure of videos and sometimes books, rather than from direct connections with peers or family. And what was Gypsy doing? Well, from February 2013 to May 26, 2015, Gypsy sent Nick a vast number of videos from an account she titled Demona Love Slave. Wasserman also pointed out that in the majority of the videos, Gypsy was depicted in highly sexualized role-playing personas. They both took turns being dominant and submissive, with Gypsy being in charge, informing Nick when it was his turn to be master or slave. Gypsy was always in control, Wasserman said. Wasserman further confirmed that the videos were instructional videos in which Nick literally learned how to relate to Gypsy. It should be noted here that in many text messages where Nick might come off as the role-playing master, this was something Gypsy taught him to do in the videos. It was his turn. Wasserman further stated that Gypsy introduced role-playing and the various personas she was feeding Nick taught him about how to make a connection with her. For example, on the subject of love, she instructed him, "If you love me, you will do this. If you love me, you will do that." In fact, besides manipulating this highly susceptible person, Gypsy's numerous videos were a way she was brainwashing Nick, molding him as a parent might mold a young child. Dr. Wasserman found Gypsy's videos to be fascinating because each persona had its own set of rules. He added, quote, "There were instruction videos that told Nick what the rewards would be for appropriate behavior, and there were instructional videos that told him what the punishment would be for behavior that the persona did not like." End quote. In one video, Gypsy appears in a red wig portraying a character who makes a threat, saying, quote, "I'll use the one card I have over you, Gypsy," end quote. This is just a glimpse of the type of programming that was going on.
One card that I have over you, Gypsy.
In another instructional video, Gypsy went into her mother's bedroom and made a stabbing motion over the bed. It was significant to Dr. Wasserman because it was a demonstration of how Mr. Godejohn was supposed to engage in murderous behavior. That video was dated about 3 weeks before Dee Dee's demise. Think about it. Why would Gypsy risk sending such an incriminating video, which can only be described as an instructional video about how to commit a murder? Wouldn't a conversation about this potential crime suffice? No, not with someone with Asperger's. Gypsy had 2.5 years to realize the key to programming and manipulating Nick lie with these instructional videos, as Dr. Wasserman has pointed out. About 3 days later, Gypsy sent Nick another video called Ruby's Introduction to Her Perfect Man. This Ruby persona's main focus would be to ready Nick to kill Dee Dee. First, Ruby introduces herself as a sociopath. She says that she herself is a person that breaks the rules, violates the rules, creates mayhem, and she basically tells Nicholas that she is his perfect match. In the video, Gypsy says, quote, "We are together, and together we are going to go on a crime spree, and we're going to rob, we're going to steal, and we're going to do all of these things because you are my perfect match. If you love me, you will do everything I tell you to do." End quote. Then, in a video 2 days before the murder, the persona Ruby commands Nick, quote, "If you love me, this is what you'll do," end quote, as she refers to the stabbing video.
So, she first asked me, how badly do you want to be with me? I told her I'll do anything to be with you, you know that. And she said, as long as my mom's alive, I can't be with you. She made that very clear.
Dr. Wasserman also testified under oath at Nick's appeal. Wasserman was privy to all the text, emails, and videos and claimed that Gypsy had turned down Nick's proposal to run away instead of committing the murder many times, even on the night of Dee Dee's demise. Nick recalls this in an interview.
At that point, there was no time going back because from the first step I walked into the house, I knew there was no going back. As ironic as I was trying to influence her to go with, but she never went with it. She never wanted to run away, so I couldn't get that to work.
The last thing you need to know to understand Nick is what Gypsy became to him. Individuals on the autism spectrum tend to hyperfocus. For Nick, Gypsy became what he hyperfocused on. Nick's mom mentions this here.
Either help Nicholas or Gypsy or
I just want everyone to know that as much as we tried to make him not stop talking to her, but see that there are other people out there, there was no way we could do it.
Okay.
He would just get upset.
Has he been like this with other girls?
No,
No.
no.
Has he had a lot of girlfriends?
Maybe one or two. I mean, he has girls that are friends, but
Right.
he had had one girlfriend when he was in high school.
Nick confuses this hyper-focus with extreme love. In 2018, Nick was still confessing his undying love for Gypsy Rose.
The only thing I would tell her is that you might have betrayed me and turned your back on me, but that's not going to stop me from loving you. I'm always going to love you, whether you want to accept it or not. I'm always going to love you. Even if you don't want to accept that, that's your choice.
Gypsy systematically became like the air he breathed. Without her, Nick would cease to exist. Gypsy literally became Nick's lifeline, and extreme panic attacks set in if he thought she would leave him. Regarding this dynamic, Nick's mom also called Gypsy a beast.
How long had it been that you were trying to discourage the relationship?
I'd say months.
Okay.
Like, Nick, you're a good-looking kid. I mean, you're a nice kid.
Would he always talk about her?
Just that he was always online with her, or she'd send him, she sent him like a ring in the mail or something, and always, I love you, and this and that, and you don't even know our relationship on The internet is not a relationship.
What kind of ring did she send him?
I don't know, so she probably got it out of a bubblegum machine. I don't know.
Okay.
But I'm sure he could tell you,
Okay.
you know. It's really sad because he is a good kid and he's a good looking kid, and for him to ruin his life over that, I'm sorry, but she's a beast.
Yeah.
Nick truly believed two things Gypsy had imprinted in his mind. Number one, her life was in mortal danger. And number two, only he could save her. During her interview, Nick's mom affirms to the detective he was never a violent individual.
LD classes in high school?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the thing is, he's a good kid. I've never had any problems with him.
Has he ever become angry with you and assaulted you or anything?
Absolutely not. No way. He would never. No way. No way. Gets a little frustrated, but when he gets frustrated, he'll just cry.
Okay.
No way. He's never been violent. That's what's so shocking. Just the way the girl acted. I mean, how can you do something to your mother or lose your mother and just act like that? I was like...
According to reports, the infamous brownie video Gypsy shot inside the motel room just hours after the crime has a backstory. We learned Nick had been a mess, crying and carrying on, and that's when Gypsy initiated sex to cheer him up.
He's eating a brownie. But later he will be eating me.
As you'll come to understand, Gypsy never shed a tear for Dee Dee. Not in that motel room, and not any day after, that according to Nick and his family, who stated she was beyond cheerful at all times. The brownie video represents the exact way Gypsy controlled Nick's emotions and behavior through instructional role-playing that was extremely sexual in nature. Why did Nick go to trial instead of taking a plea deal? Well, the only plea deal Nick was offered was a second-degree murder charge with life in prison. He could have possibly been paroled after 30 years, or not. Knowing Gypsy got 10 years, Nick didn't understand why he was not offered the same deal. Let's be clear. Nick's lead attorney, Dwayne Perry, did not request that their one expert witness in forensic psychology, Dr. Franks, look into a diminished capacity defense. A diminished capacity defense, also known as diminished responsibility, is a legal theory that a defendant may not have been able to form the mental state required to commit a crime due to mental impairment or disease. Nick's attorney admits this at his appeals hearing, that they were not interested in hiring an expert to prove that defense.
Reason for not investigating and hiring a neuropsychologist with autism specialty to support that diminished capacity defense?
No, ma'am. We were comfortable with Dr. Franks, and it didn't occur to me to do such a thing until shortly after.
Furthermore, Nick never stood a chance at trial. As we outlined in Part 2, he didn't understand that this wasn't about justice. It was about politics and how this looked in the media. The narrative that DA Dan Patterson sold was Gypsy as the poor little girl who was being systematically abused by her mother. Enter delusional Nick Godejohn, who had this evil side that informed poor little Gypsy he was all in on committing a murder. DA Patterson even used Gypsy's many documentaries in court.
In picking a jury, that the volume of pretrial publicity was so great that there would be a presumption of prejudice among potential jurors in Greene County?
Yes.
Videos of various television and cable shows were played in court, many of which featured Gypsy giving her side of the story.
Certainly doesn't portray the accuracy of the relationship between Mr. Godejohn and Ms. Blanchard.
We were also utterly blown away to discover Gypsy Rose Blanchard was not a witness for the prosecution. Yep, that's right. Prosecuting attorney Dan Patterson did not call Gypsy as a witness to testify against Nick. So we had to ask, Why wouldn't the prosecuting attorney, who gave Gypsy her sweet plea deal, why wouldn't he want Gypsy as his star witness? What was he hiding? At some point after he gave Gypsy her plea deal, Patterson must have realized Gypsy was a huge liability, and if he put her on the stand for the prosecution, then Nick's attorney would get a chance to cross-examine her. And Lord knows Gypsy might have blurted out things that were not consistent with her narrative. In other words, the truth might be exposed. In July 2016, Gypsy's plea deal is announced. One article in the Springfield News Leader from that time says, quote, "There is no agreement for Gypsy Rose Blanchard to testify against Godejohn. The prosecutor said he would not comment on whether he will call Gypsy Blanchard to testify at Godejohn's trial," end quote. This revelation was really shocking to us. Even Law and Crime wrongly titled this video, quote, "GRB testifies against X," end quote. And their mistake was taking for granted what most always happens in a case like this one. When you see one defendant agree to take a plea deal, usually part of that deal mandates they will appear as a witness against the other co-defendant going to trial. The fact that Patterson intentionally kept Gypsy off his witness list says volumes about what was really going on. It says volumes about Gypsy's credibility. It confirms that the prosecution had something to hide. If Gypsy had nothing to hide, then you'd gladly and happily put her on the stand as your witness, regardless of the fact that she would be cross-examined. Prosecutor Patterson could not take a chance that his plea deal would be exposed, that it was based on a series of untruths. But wait, you're thinking, we know Gypsy took the stand. Well, yes, she did, as a witness for the defense, as a witness for Nick Godejohn. Let that sink in. So, Nick's attorney subpoenas Gypsy, meaning she had no choice but to testify as a witness for Nick. You might be wrongly thinking, oh, Gypsy's testimony was to help Nick. Wrong. This handicapped Nick's attorney from impeaching her as a liar on the stand. When an attorney subpoenas a witness, there are rules to what and how he can question that witness. This was a dirty tricks move by prosecuting attorney Dan Patterson, who gave Gypsy her plea deal. A deal he had to protect. A plea deal he did not want possibly impeached through Gypsy's own words on the stand. Now, this still could have worked out to Nick's advantage. You see, as we said, there are court rules about questioning certain witnesses. When a witness is considered your witness, as Gypsy was for Nick, that means Nick's attorney could not ask her leading questions, like you see in a blistering cross-examination.
Gave an order that Santiago wasn't to be touched. Then why did he have to be transferred? Colonel, Lieutenant Kendrick ordered the code red, didn't he? Because that's what you told Lieutenant Kendrick to do.
Object! And when it went bad, you cut these guys loose! Your Honor, you had Marcus inside a phony transfer. Your Honor, you doctored the logbook. Damn it, Captain! You coerced the doctor.
Consider yourself in contempt.
Colonel Jessup, did you order the code red?
In other words, Nick's attorney has to play nice. He can't take her on and attempt to discredit her in any way, unless he is able to take her as a hostile witness, which is defined as, quote, if the examining attorney who called the witness finds that their testimony is antagonistic or contrary to the legal position of their client, that attorney may request that the judge declare the witness hostile. If the request is granted, the attorney may proceed to ask the witness leading questions. He can come at her and try to shred her on the stand then. But Nick's attorney never does this. He doesn't even attempt to try and take Gypsy as a hostile witness. In fact, Prosecutor Patterson ends up objecting to a question by Nick's attorney when he knows Gypsy's answer to this question might be contrary to their narrative.
Oh, my mother.
And you knew that when you went and stole it, correct?
Yes.
Now, there's been some discussion of some of these fantasies you had. These were all fantasies that the two of you had, correct?
Yes, sir.
Collectively.
Yes, sir.
You guys did this with some regularity, correct?
Yes.
And you willingly agreed to make these videos.
Yes.
And you also yourself wrote some letters, some stories that involve sex, am I correct?
Yes.
Wrote for him.
Yes.
And this reference to this agreement that you're going to be master-slave, that was something you guys did together?
I'm going to object. This whole line of questioning has been leading, and this is the defendant's witness. The rules are very clear on that.
It is our witness, Judge. I'll be glad to rephrase the question.
The prosecuting attorney says, "This is the defendant's witness. The rules are very clear on this." Patterson was using the rules to ensure Gypsy wouldn't say something to damage their narrative or case. These are the very rules Patterson was counting on, and why he made sure if Gypsy took the stand, it would be for the defense. Additionally, Nick's attorney was so inept he did not have a real grasp of the evidence. For example, while under oath, Gypsy admits to running away in 2011 to Mercy Hospital, which many know was to see her first love, Dan Glidewell, who was a patient there. Gypsy then says she goes back to his house.
When did you run away?
In the spring of 2011.
Did you tell Nick about that?
Yes, sir.
When did you tell Nick about that?
I don't remember the exact time.
Was it before your mother's murder?
Yes.
Did you ever consider running away after that? After you ran away in 2011?
Yes, but I knew that it would end badly.
What happened when you ran away? Tell us about running away in 2011.
It was in the middle of the night, and I packed a small bag of stuff, and my mother was asleep, so I left the house, and I met up with one of my friends.
And where did you go?
To, first at Mercy Hospital in Springfield, and then to his house.
And at some point, did your mom figure out where you were?
Yes, sir.
When was that?
4 hours later.
A few minutes later, Nick's attorney has a chance to impeach Gypsy's testimony, prove she is lying on the stand, when he asked her, "How many boyfriends did you have prior to Nick?"
Gypsy, how many boyfriends did you have prior to Nick?
None.
Attorney Perry, Nick's attorney, appears to have no idea Gypsy has just lied, and he could prove it by having her testimony read back about the time she ran away to his house. Now, Gypsy could lie on the stand and say that man Dan was just a friend. However, at that point, Nick's attorney could have taken Gypsy as a hostile witness. He never attempts to do this. When the prosecution cross-examines Gypsy, he treats her as if she is his own witness, because clearly, for all intents and purposes, she is his own witness, not Nick's. Additionally, contrary to the evidence seen by law enforcement personnel and Dr. Wasserman, the prosecutor makes sure the jury believes it was Nick who started this role-playing. Not only is the role-playing evidence, which was examined by multiple law enforcement personnel and Dr. Wasserman, proves Gypsy was the instigator, Gypsy's former lover, Dan Glidewell, later testified during another proceeding, confirming it was Gypsy who introduced him to the BDSM role-playing world a full year before she ever met Nick Godejohn. Another glaring issue. Why wasn't Glidewell called as a witness for Nick? We also can confirm that Nick's attorney never objects to Gypsy's alleged lies about the role-playing on the stand, nor about her lies claiming Nick was her first boyfriend. From the standpoint of the jury, Gypsy comes off as a truth teller. For appearance sake, the judge allowed Gypsy to wear street clothes, and her shackles were never seen by the jury. Nick's attorney did not object to any of this. Nick's entire defense consisted of Gypsy Rose and one other witness, a forensic psychologist who had no special knowledge about autism or Asperger's. This left the jury with zero understanding of Nick's true disability, while they believed every word out of Gypsy's mouth. After just 2 hours of deliberation, they found him guilty of premeditated first-degree murder. This was a setup, plain and simple. What would have happened if the entire truth came out during Nick's trial? Dr. Wasserman opined, quote, Mr. Godejohn was prejudiced because the testimony of a neuropsychologist specializing in autism spectrum disorder would have caused the jury to have a reasonable doubt as to the deliberation element, and there is a reasonable probability that Mr. Godejohn would not have been found guilty of first-degree murder, end quote. The 2 years of role-playing videos were a foundation for the events that took place on the night of Dee Dee's demise. Nick was programmed and brainwashed to follow instructions and engage in a behavior based on the fact that it was up to him to save her life. Gypsy got Nick to use the evil Victor character from their role-playing to do the deed. Dr. Wasserman opined, quote, the act of murdering Dee Dee was always equated with love because that is the only way an autistic person would be able to understand this, end quote. If Gypsy would have been properly cross-examined and proven to be lying on the stand, if the jury would have seen the vast majority of videos of Gypsy's personas giving instructions, and if a qualified autism expert would have testified, there's a very good possibility a jury would have come back with a just and equitable verdict for Nicholas Godejohn. Now that you have a good grasp of Nick's condition and his programming by Gypsy, it's time we take a look at some statements by Nick that prove Gypsy's still hiding so many things. In one interview, Nick reveals Gypsy had attempted to kill Dee Dee not once, but twice before, and it was over her first lover, Dan Glidewell. Her obsession with him remained foremost on her mind.
Originally, I wanted to just run away with her, but she kept on persisting on this alternative thing that really didn't seem to pan out in the way that it never was obviously meant to. Yep. Since she had warned me that she's tried it twice before, and she's only mentioned one of those times in the media. The other, apparently she almost got close to killing her mother, but however, she couldn't do it. She was attempting to do it mainly for someone that she had an infatuation with, and, well...
After Gypsy arrived in Wisconsin, was it her plan to disappear from Nick's house at some point, while she ensured Nick would be seen as the lone perpetrator? Well, there is additional evidence that backs up that theory. Most people have seen the 2 infamous Facebook posts Gypsy made claiming she was trying to alert the authorities her mother was dead. But what some may not know is that Gypsy made a 3rd Facebook post and then deleted it when the cops surrounded Nick's home. Gypsy's 3rd Facebook post read, quote, "The girl is dead too," end quote. This isn't a rumor. This is from a police report by Officer Hughes, who spoke with Kim Blanchard, no relation, a neighbor of Gypsy and Dee Dee's. Kim had captured a screenshot of the post in real time and later emailed it to Officer Hughes. Why would Gypsy need to make sure law enforcement thought she was dead? Well, Gypsy explained that last Facebook post to a cellmate in prison named Michaela Lutz, who reported to prison authorities that Gypsy confessed that 3rd Facebook post, "The girl is dead too," was to ensure Nick would be found to be the lone perpetrator while she disappeared. Gypsy not only manipulated Nick, she also manipulated his mother and father. Stephanie, Nick's mom, frantically messaged Gypsy as Nick was heading down to Missouri to kill Dee Dee. She was worried, sick about her son who wasn't answering her phone calls. She was beyond upset, messaging Gypsy on Facebook, quote, "I need to know my son is okay, exclamation point, end quote.
You know, treat him like when he was last doctor I talked to, they said his mind is probably always going to be 15, 16, right around there. So we always try to keep a close watch on him when he said he wanted to go down there. I mean, I was a basket case.
In another message, Gypsy assures Nick's parents she will make sure he is looked after, revealing she is very aware of his disabilities and needing supervision. The sick and twisted response she gave to Nick's mom, knowing she was about to put a knife in his hand, is, quote, "He's perfectly good, Mrs. Stephanie, exclamation point, end quote." Nick Godejohn's mother, Stephanie, was taken completely off guard when she found out about Dee Dee's demise. It appears that she had a hard life. Some have made accusations saying that she was less than supportive of Nick while he was growing up. We do know he was living with her at the time of his arrest, and by all accounts, she was worried sick when he took off for Missouri. In February 2019, Nick was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and was subsequently sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On June 13, 2021, a little more than 2 years later, Nick's mom, Stephanie, was found dead. She had overdosed on heroin. Nick's uncle Michael Curry shared these thoughts, quote, "I'll miss my little sister Stephanie Ann's beautiful smile and her cute little laugh. I miss giving her a big brotherly hug and laughing and reminiscing of our past, of good times and bad. I love you, Steph, with all my heart. May God reach out and bless your soul." During the investigation, Stephanie was blaming herself for allowing Nick to leave the house and venture to see Gypsy. She was beating herself up for believing Gypsy's, quote, "Southern charm and lies," end quote. We surmise, as the months wore on and Nick was found guilty, Stephanie further blamed herself for the situation. She blamed herself for believing Gypsy when she said, quote, "He's perfectly good, Mrs. Stephanie," exclamation point, end quote. Reports from anonymous sources told us she turned to hardcore drugs to take away the pain. This is just another sorrow Nick must cope with in prison. This also left Nick's younger brother Quinn motherless too. Quinn and Stephanie are just additional victims of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Gypsy has also turned on almost everyone who came into her life after she was arrested. She has proven to be a one-woman wrecking ball. Her behavior has demonstrated she feels no remorse, and she will use and abuse anyone who gets in her way. We are not here to proclaim that Nicholas Godejohn is not guilty of a crime. However, what we know for sure is that Nick became expendable to so many in this case. It was easier to let Gypsy, who appeared to be 12 years old, to get a sweet plea deal, while Nick, the strange, disabled man with no resources, became the scapegoat who would pay with his life in prison. This was seen as justice for those men in power in Greene County, Missouri. What is unbelievably sad is that for Nick, the 5 days he spent with Gypsy following the crime have become the best memories of his entire life. Now, compare that to Gypsy living her best life. We believe wholeheartedly Nick did not receive a vigorous defense nor a fair trial. We believe Nick deserves those things as an American citizen. He is a disabled individual with no resources who fell through the cracks. Evidence would also suggest he was set up from the start, first by Gypsy and then by the powers that be in Greene County, Missouri. Justice delayed is justice denied. Thank you for watching. If you appreciate our content, please like and share. We really love all the support. Thanks again.